Chapter 16. Now Sarai, Avram's woman, bore him no children, and she had a handmaid, a Mitzri, whose name was Hagar. Now, in this particular passage, the Cepher uses the word Hagar as compared to the name Hagar, which has been a pronunciation given to us by the Masoretic Nikudot. We believe that proper pronunciation is Hagar, again, rightly dividing the word. And in the case of Hagar, we can see that the word has a particular meaning, which is that it doesn't just mean, it's not just a proper noun, but rather he, gimel, resh, the he being a prefix, because the gimel resh is a word, and the word is stranger. So what we see here is that the name given to her is the stranger, Hagar, the stranger. Okay. And Sarah said to Avram, behold now, Yahweh has restrained me from bearing. I pray, go in unto my maid, that it may be that I may obtain children by her. Now, and Avram heard the voice of Sarai. Now, again, here we see an idea that is going to be followed later on by Raquel, who will suggest the same thing. And it's ironic because so many of the matriarchs, if you will, in the scriptural narrative are barren women. Whether you're talking about Sarai, or you're talking about Raquel, the mother of Yosef, or you're talking about Elisheva, the mother of John the Baptist. These are women who had spent a lifetime with no children, unable to have children. And yet, very late in life, they're going to give birth. And of course, this is going to be miraculous in its occurrence. And in the case of Sarai, it's a great miracle. Well, let's see what happens here. And Sarai, Avram's woman, took Hagar, her maid, the Mitzri, after Avram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to her man Avram to be his woman. Now you can see here at this point, we see the same kind of difficulty we saw with Adam. And the difficulty we saw with Adam was what? There was an instruction given both to Adam and to Hua that it was possible to do anything you wanted in the garden, but the one thing you could not do was to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And it was Hua who had decided, well, I'm not sure that I believe the word of Yahweh, and particularly when she was tempted, did Yahweh really say that? Her temptation yielded to an idea that was in its essence disobedient. And then it is from this particular suggestion that, well, did Yah really say that? Or was that someone else who said that? That we get to a point that Hua elects to eat from that tree. And when Adam discovers that she had eaten from that tree, knowing full well what it brought, what it meant, and where it was going, that he too would eat from the tree. And so he follows the disobedience of his wife. Now here Sarai has been told she is going to be a mother, that in fact Abram is going to have an heir. And she doesn't trust Yahweh in respect of this heir. And so she encourages Avram to take on a surrogate mother. And the surrogate mother would be the stranger from Mitzri. Now you notice that she is a Mitzrayim stranger and not a Canaanite. She is not a Canaanim, she's not an Amorim or a Girgashim or a Yevusim or a Peritzim or a Hittim or any of those. Rather, she's Mitzri. Okay, and he went into Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her eyes. In other words, there is an event that takes place, of course, inside women, that when they conceive, that there is a change in their heart towards what is going on in their body. And Sarai said to Abram, "My wrong be upon you. I have given my maid into your bosom." And when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her eyes. So Sarai had anticipated that this would be a simple black and white decision on the part of Hagar. We're commissioning you to be a surrogate mother, therefore get pregnant, have the baby, and then bye, we'll see you later. But this isn't what happens because, of course, the intimate relationship between the infant and the mother. Yahweh judge between me and you. And see, Sarai has already said, Yahweh judge between me and you, because this was Sarai's idea and Abram had adhered to it. But Abram said to El Sarai, "Behold, your maid is in your hand. Do to her as it pleases you." And when Sarai dealt harshly with her, she fled from her face. So we can see that the decision made by Sarai was to inflict harshness on Hagar, because Hagar had shown an attachment, an inordinate attachment to the pregnancy, and despised Sarai because of that. In other words, Hagar took the position that because Avram had conceived within her, that she was now more of a wife to Avram than Sarai, particularly in light of the fact that, unlike Sarai, Hagar became pregnant. And the messenger of Yahweh found her by a fountain of water in the wilderness, by the fountain on the way to Shur. And he said to Hagar, Sarai's maid, "From where have you come, and where will you go?" And she said, "I will flee from the face of my mistress Sarai." And the messenger of Yahweh said to her, "Return to your mistress and submit yourself under her hands." And the messenger of Yahweh said to her, "I will multiply your seed exceedingly, that it shall not be numbered for multitude." And the messenger of Yahweh said to her, "Behold, you are with child and shall bear a son, and you shall call at his name Yishmael, because Yahweh has heard your affliction." Now, again, here we see a messenger of Yah delivering a blessing to Hagar, although Hagar is Mitzri. And this is an important thing to understand, that you cannot simply write off the world and say, "Oh, only Yitzhak is blessed." Well, no, the firstborn of Avram is Yishmael, and Yishmael is also blessed. And when the messenger says to her, "I will multiply your seed exceedingly, that it shall not be numbered for multitude," this is true. And we're going to see that even though there is a great difficulty between Avram and Hagar, and she is cast out, yet Yishmael would become the father of 12 sons, 12 tribes. And those 12 tribes are blessed in the hands of Yahweh. This cannot be forgotten and should not be forgotten. Okay. And he will be a wild man. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. And she called the name of Yahweh that spoke to her El Roi. For she said, "Have I also here looked after him that sees me?" Wherefore the well was called Be'er Lachai Roi. Behold, it is between Kadesh and Bered. And again, we see here that Avram was a well digger. We're going to spend a little bit of time on this idea of Avram being a well digger and what this meant. But we can see here that when you see this idea of, she called Yahweh El Roi, well, this idea from Ra'ah, and this is probably better said as Ra'i, but it's kind of hard to put that into writing. But we see the idea of the root word and the suffix yod. And the suffix yod means my, And so when she says El Roi, it is the vision of Yah, is a better way to put it, the vision of El. But it can be translated as you see me. And then she comes to the well, and where she is at the well, and it's called Be'er, which means the well, Lachai, to life of he who sees, to the life that sees me, a well to the life that sees me. Behold, it is between Kadesh and Bered. And Hagar bore Avram a son, and Avram called his son's name, which Hagar bore, Yishmael. And Avram was 86 years old, 86 years old, when Hagar bore Yishmael to Avram. Okay, now let's talk about Avram as a well digger, because when we think about these wells, there's been a recent well unearthed. I think it's in Turkey where they unearthed this well, and it gives you an idea of what the ancient well digging was about. We often think, in America, we dig wells completely differently. We have a machine come in and that has a bore, and the bore digs a hole straight down, sometimes hundreds of feet, to finally find water. And then of course, piping is put into this borehole, and a well pump then is put inside the piping, and the well pump pulls the water up out of the well by means of a siphon. But in the ancient times, this was done differently. And of course, the fool would dig a very small well. And you oftentimes see these wells dug in the West and in maybe in Texas or something, where you don't see a well much wider than maybe 6 feet around. And it's dug down maybe 20, 30, maybe 40 feet. This is a very difficult circumstance and a very dangerous circumstance because, the wells can collapse on you and bury you right there. And so the ancient wells were more like 30 feet around. And so they would dig these wells down. They would dig a large circumference circle, and they would dig these wells down until they began to hit water. And then once they hit water, they would stone the bottom of the well, and then they would stone the walls. And so in stoning the walls, the well would fill up, and there would be a substantial body of water. I mean, you're talking about a well that's 30 feet around, and that is going to fill up from the underground aquifer. And so it was Abraham that recognized. And what was the essence of Abraham's wealth? Well, the essence of Abraham's wealth were herds. And from the herds came the gold and the silver. And so he had much cattle and he had many sheep. And this is what it is written. Well, how did he sustain these cattle and these sheep? He did so by providing them water. And how did he provide them with water? He provided them water with digging wells. And so we know he dug many wells. And the fools that were around him, that after Abraham left, they went and buried these wells. Now, how stupid is that? How foolish was that? They buried the sustenance that would have in turn made them wealthy. But we see this quite often in the modern world, that people who have little education and who don't think destroy the very thing that would make them wealthy, that would make them secure, that would make them independent, that would make them happy. They destroy that in order to follow their traditions or the nuances of their subtleties or whatever it may be. And this was the case. But in this particular case, when she is finding a well, she's finding something that Abraham had previously dug and had created, tapping the water of the earth in order to bring wealth to his family. So, and keep this in mind too, that when Abraham did this, he wasn't taking someone else's water. He was finding water through his own resources, and by digging a well, he managed to give himself sustenance with the living water, and the living water would in turn sustain his cattle and sustain his sheep. And you might recall that some of these things, for instance, the well of Yaakov was at Shechem was also a well that had been dug repeatedly by Abraham because they had buried it, and Abraham redug it. And this well is the site where Mashiach visits the woman at the well, and she is the first to be delivered into the salvation of Mashiach, although she has been married 5 times and the man she was currently living with wasn't her husband. So we see that this is an important part of Abraham being the well digger. We also see here that this idea that Sarai had done wrong, and Sarai does not discover this, but she's acting on her own recognizance instead of acting on the instruction of Yah, instead of having faith that Yah is going to deliver, because after all, Sarai is in a position where she cannot bear children. Now, at the point that we're talking about here, this late in life, you know, a woman, and I'm going to speak on this briefly because I'm not really a biologist, but a woman has a finite number of ovum, and there comes a point where you go through a lifetime of cycles, which are cycling these ovum through the female body in order to present them for purposes of pregnancy and for purposes of childbearing. And when you cycle through to the end of this cycle, when these ovum run out, then a woman pretty much knows that she is completely without any more ovum, because there is a change in life that takes place. And this change in life that takes place changes a woman's body structure and the way a woman reacts to a monthly cycle. And oftentimes the monthly cycles go away. And so Sarai is long past that point. She's long past the disappearance of her monthly cycle, long past it, decades past it. And so in her mind, she is thinking, this is impossible. What does she say here? She says, and Sarai said in verse 2, and Sarai said to Abraham, behold, now Yahweh has restrained me from bearing. Now, this is one way of putting it. Restrained is a nice word. It could also be said that when you're talking about this word, this is the word atzar, and it means to hold back, to close up, to refrain, to restrain, to stay. So, Yahweh has stayed me from bearing. Yahweh has held me back from restraining, right? Yahweh has closed me up that I cannot bear. All of these things are another way to say that Sarai is seeing in her own body that she is incapable of bearing a child. And yet Abram is in a situation where Yah has promised him an heir, and that he is going to have an heir, and that he said that and if you can count the stars, if you are able to number them, so shall your seed be, an innumerable multitude. And yet there is nothing. So Sarai has the idea, let's get a surrogate mother. And of course, this surrogate mother, in concept, appears to be something viable, but in reality is not. In reality, it is a problem, and it's going to become a problem between Ishmael and the eventual seed of Sarai. However, not a dramatic problem, because you see in the book of Yashar that Ishmael and Yitzhak actually get along. And even though Ishmael goes his way and his sons are blessed, and by the way, when we look at the sons of Ishmael, remember that these sons of Ishmael are going to be half Hebrew and half Mitzri, Egyptian. Well, not Egyptian, Mitzri. But the Mitzri and the Hebrew are going to be the lineage of Ishmael. And people want to say that, Ishmael, these are the Arab nations. And I don't think that is supported in the record. I think what's supported in the record is what you're talking about, the vast majority of Mitzrayim and also those living in Libya, Tunisia, and in these areas are most likely the children of Ishmael and these tribes. Okay, now, also we see that Sarai is going to assign this. She's going to say, okay, I have done wrong, right? I have done wrong. But she looks to Abraham and says, Yahweh, judge between me and you. Was it me who did wrong by coming up with the idea, or you who did wrong by actually following through with my stupid idea? And so Yah is going to say, look, this is not the miracle that I have in mind ultimately. And yet there is judgment that comes out of this concept, because from this decision made by Sarai comes a, how can I put it? It comes a vexing. There comes a strife. There comes, and this is the whole thing with Abram. We see with Abram that Abram believed, and it was accounted unto him as righteousness. He believed and obeyed. Yah said, you shall become a stranger in a strange land. Go, and he went. He did what Yah told him to do. And this was accounted unto him as righteousness. Yet even in this covenant that is expressed to Abraham, the covenant of the Holy Land, and the covenant that he would be a father of many nations, even in this covenant, we see that then Yah still projects, your progeny are going to go into slavery in Mitzrayim, and they're going to be there for, centuries. And they're going to be enslaved by these people. They're going to be strangers in a strange land. Why would this affliction come upon Abraham when he obeyed? And it's the same here that we see Sarai and Abraham. And Sarai is thinking to herself, well, Yah came to Abraham and told him he's going to have an heir and he's going to be the father of many nations. And where is Sarai? Why was Sarai so desperate for a child? Well, again, this goes back to the inheritance that we find inside this discussion, because prior to Moshe's delivery of the Torah, which is going to have a different inheritance scheme, the inheritance ideas at this time was that the primogenitor, the firstborn son, would inherit all of the estate. The wife would inherit nothing. And so because of this, the idea was that all that belonged to the wife was her dowry. And so the family of the wife would give her a dowry, which would be some portion of her inheritance that may have existed, but they would give her a dowry. And from this dowry, she was expected to live. Well, you can imagine after a long lifetime of marriage that this dowry is long since gone. And so if Abraham were to die, Sarai would have nothing. She would have nothing. It would be proper for her to jump on the funeral fire like they do in Hinduism, because she would have nothing. So it's very important for her to have an heir, to provide Abraham with an heir, that she might have sustenance in the event of his death, because Abraham is intent upon giving everything to Eleazar. And so this point is going to be very significant, and we're going to see that in Abraham, all of the estate is in fact given to Yitzhak, and in Yitzhak, all of the estate is given to Yaakov, but it is stolen by Esau. Only in Yaakov do we see the change in the giving of the estate of the testator. It's going to be given to all of the sons of Yaakov, and even to the adopted sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, and a double portion being given to Yosef. The double portion would have been given to Reuben, the firstborn, but Reuben had gone up to his father's couch, and as a consequence, the estate was given to the firstborn of Rachel, Yosef. This is substantiated in 1 Chronicles 5:1. So at any rate, when we see this idea of the estate going exclusively and 100% to the primogenitor, the impetus of Sarai to do something because you could see that it would also be possible for Avram to say, well, I'm going to go away from you and find another woman who is going to give me an heir. But the scriptural narrative does not say this was Avram's idea. The scriptural narrative says it was Sarai's idea. And as a consequence, because Sarai does this, and she says to Avram, she says, Yahweh, judge between me and you. Well, ultimately, we're going to see that Yitzhak is, of course, going to be proposed for a human sacrifice. And in that human sacrifice, the stress of it for Sarai is too great. And Sarai predeceases Abraham by some. Abraham goes on to marry Keturah and has another 6 sons following her death. So we can see that there is a judgment. Yahweh does, in fact, judge between Sarai and Abraham. And this is one of the grievous difficulties of this passage, because in all of this, one cannot say that Sarai was disrespectful or disobedient. She had a difficult time believing Yah and tried to take matters into her own hands. And in doing so, she did something that was not called upon, to create a child that was not intended by Yah, and yet was going to be blessed by Yah, notwithstanding the fact that it was her intention instead of Yah's intention. And ultimately, it is going to come to bear that Sarai is going to be miraculously impregnated. And this is a wonderful thing as well. We're going to talk about that when we get to that narrative, because the impregnation of Sarai is going to be Yah providing in her a miraculous and supernatural ovum that is going to be the life of Yitzhak. And this supernatural ovum in Yitzhak is going to be something that is going to be clear, completely clear, of the mDNA that would come forward from Hua, the disobedient. And, and while I'm talking about this, let's just remember that when we talk about the disobedience in Hua, which her disobedience was such that when they ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, there was some kind of genetic trigger that took place that brought death into the DNA of both Adam and Hua. And this death is going to be transferred from generation to generation. But we also see this idea that after the flood, prior to the flood, the imagination of men was wicked all the time. It was only wickedness, only evil. There was no semblance of morality or trying to do a right or good thing. It was only wickedness and evil. And when you get to after the flood, we see that Yah is expanding, and the children of Noah are going to be those who contemplate both the good and the evil. Now, ultimately, when we see the final turning of the screw, if you will, mankind will leave off evil entirely. But right now, mankind is in a blend of both good and evil. And we see the same kind of decision-making being made in that mind of Sarah that was made in the mind of Hua. Did Yah really say, I'm going to give you an heir and you're going to be the father of many nations? Did Yah really say that? Aren't I your wife? I mean, these kinds of things were going on in her mind. And so she made this decision. But nonetheless, we're going to see that that decision that was made, if you will, an epigenetic decision stemming from Hua, we can see that the impregnation of Sarai with the birth of Yitzhak is going to have a miraculous and supernatural DNA in the ovum that Yah would provide. And that is something that is going to be incredible in our gospel narrative.